We're on for the agenda for our May 2013 meeting. As of the time of creating this video, we have not yet decided which agenda items to pursue. Many have arisen over the past several weeks. If you guys listened to the debrief of our last meeting, you'll hear that there's a lot of items that came out of that for discussion with the board. We obviously can't discuss all of them. Knowing this board, if we get to 2 of them, we'll be doing very, very well. You'll see the agenda items, the potential agenda items on the screen here. So I want to go through each of these one by one and just talk a little bit about what they would be for when we decide which ones we're going to do. Okay. First up, the board as a living laboratory. What does it mean for the board to be a living laboratory? What does it mean to be doing governance at the same time as being a learning and teaching lab? And very much like in the report, I mentioned that I am simultaneously doing the work of the executive director, but also being a demonstration to examine what does it mean to be doing this. Oh, my screen just went blank. There we go. I'm back. What does it mean to be doing this? The same thing applies to what does it mean for us to be a living laboratory as a board? And everything from what are our goals in having outside participants? We sort of made that decision because it just felt so right, with months and months of discussion and months and months of blogging, and then inviting people to be in the hangout with us. And then it just made logical sense to have it be more participatory. But it would be a really helpful discussion now that we have been inside this for several months to ask, what do we think that this can accomplish? What is it already accomplishing? What are we learning from having this open participatory way of governing? What are folks who are participating via Twitter learning? So it would be wonderful to have this conversation be that big and that engaged. Where are we seeing value to the organization and to the participants who are not specifically on the board? Everything from what needs to be in place during a meeting to create stop-action teachable moments. Again, if this is a living laboratory, how do we say, okay, time out, I want to share with everybody what we just did so that we can be explicit, so that people don't just think, oh, this is what Creating the Future does. They actually learn, this is how we do it, time out, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, and notice what the results were. So again, if we are a teaching and learning laboratory, what does that mean for us as a board? So that is agenda item potentially number 1. Another item that has come up in conversation with Alexandra. Alexandra is going to be sharing with you guys soon updated conflict of interest statements. It became clear that we haven't updated ours in about 1.5 years for those of us who signed them 1.5 years ago, and new board members have come on and haven't signed one at all. That brought up lots of the kinds of legal issues that boards need to deal with. The process for our legal obligations. And so how do we want to work with creating the budget and adopting the budget? We know that our bylaws are placeholder bylaws. What do we want to do now that we're pretty, we certainly don't have everything set in stone, but we have a sense of what our process is. How do we want to codify that in bylaws? What do we want to do about our annual meeting? What do we want our annual meeting to accomplish? When do we want it to be? So those are questions if we choose to address that as an agenda item. The next thing that you'll see in the rock and roll list of what could be agenda items are rotating roles among board members. What we're talking about is that there's several roles, including chairing the board, including chairing the meetings, that it would be really, really helpful if we rotate them. It will be training for everybody. Everybody will get to learn. We get to learn different styles. We get to not always hear me talking. Seriously, which is great succession planning for me, because I know that I could walk out into the street and be hit by a meteor between the time I shot this video and it gets live to you. So we need to have you know, if for no other reason, succession planning. But some of the roles that we're talking about are not just the chair, but things like someone in charge of nurturing the relationships between board members between meetings. Because we know that the power of what happens at the meeting is the degree to which people know and trust each other. So maybe having somebody whose job, and again, rotating this month it's going to be somebody, this month it'll be somebody else, to nurture those relationships, engage conversation, whatever that takes. There's a role that Dimitri and I have often talked about with groups. We don't have a good enough name for it. We sort of, you know, placeholder, call it the consciousness monitor, and no, Mark, there is no unconsciousness monitor, although we could have one of those too. Who is in charge of maintaining the values, the vision, the frameworks, the process, when the rest of us act like merely mortal humans and either get stuck in a spiral of fear, go off on a tangent, start problem solving, start going into advice mode, all of the things that we know are dangerous for affirmative process, and yet we're all just human. And so having somebody who says, guys, let's remember to reach for what's possible, or is there a way we could reframe that it's not giving advice, that it's more listening and coming back to what's strong and what's powerful. So a chair, the nurturing of relationships, the consciousness monitor and unconsciousness monitor. And then another role that we're seeing, and this may be the evolution of the Drew and Jessica role of board documentarian, is somebody who is really in charge of the participants who are not in the room with us. So monitoring the tweets, especially as more and more people start to engage, monitoring the tweets, engaging those people, tweeting out, not just listening, but also tweeting out, so that if we want to attract people, we know that the viral nature of Twitter is what you tweet out and what people retweet. Well, if somebody says something profound at the board meeting, somebody that could be tweeted out and with a hashtag, and people can start, you know, doing what Twitter does best, is bring people to the meeting. It could also be engaging the people who are immediately watching. You know, Dimitri just said X. Gail just said Y. What do you think about this? So just actually engaging that conversation beyond what the chair is really focused on. So those are just some of the roles that we saw that it would be helpful if we rotated them. We're seeing this as voluntary, at least how we talked about it in our debrief, that nobody's going to be forced to step outside the comfort zone because that's not who we are. But so that is potential agenda item number 3. Potential agenda item number 4, how do we signal consensus? If you guys have not already listened to the debrief, at the very, very end, at 1 minute or 1 hour, 26 minutes, Gail brings up an issue, and I'd like you to hear it in her own words. So I will talk about it here, but if you will listen to just that 1.5 to 3 minutes of Gail bringing this up. How do we signal that we're making a decision when no motion is required? Really what we're talking about is process for consensus. And Gail brought up that during our last meeting, there wasn't really a need for a motion, but we did not come to closure on the issue to say, are we in agreement? What is that agreement? Can we articulate that agreement? If we were to make a motion, what would the motion be, etc. And so that is item 4 of our potential agenda items. The 5th of our potential agenda items is how do agenda items get onto the agenda in the first place? Currently, there are 3 ways that happens. One, the most typical is that it's a continuation of the discussion. So we discussed X at our last board meeting. As we're putting all of X into practice, either at the end of the discussion of X, we say, let's do that at the next meeting. Or putting X into practice, it becomes evident that there's a next conversation that has to happen. So that's the most common that we have found with this board. The second is when something comes up and we need to talk about it. So that was the meeting last week or last month, feels like last week, where the issue that came out of Dimitri and I trying to implement the resource development plan and coming up against something that we needed board guidance on, and that we felt that was a values issue for the board. So, and that's not uncommon of how most agendas happen in most organizations. It's either a continuation of discussion or something that's come up in the day-to-day that needs board focus. The other thing that we have done over time is we have sent a list of items out to the board on the listserv and said, here's 3 or 4 things that are coming up. What do you guys want to talk about? But we don't have a process for how we want to decide that. We don't have a process for who decides that. Some of the things that that Dimitri and I have used internally for our own prioritizing might be helpful. We look at really 3 items. Will it move us forward? Is it going to prevent something really bad from happening? So is there a liability that is hanging out there waiting for us to step into it? Is it preventing somebody else from doing their work? Or could it engage somebody else to immediately do something? Could it build building blocks and make somebody else's work easier? But there's a whole range of other things that we might be considering as we're talking about how do we want to decide what gets on the agenda. So that is the 5th item that we could be discussing. And then the last one is a discussion of our values, very specific to how we make decisions. We talked about our values a little bit, 6-8 months ago, when we were doing the initial phase 1 of our Change the World plan, our community impact plan. And we talked about the conditions we would want to see in others, the behaviors we would want to see in others, and we talked about the fact that we would want to walk that talk. It became very, very clear at the last meeting that we, A, don't have to wait, and B, really can't wait to talk about the values upon which we want to base our decisions as a board. We don't have to wait for our planning session to happen, which could be a year from now when we finally get partners together. We can talk about that right now. What values do we want to base our decisions on as a board, and in what order? When we have tough decisions to make, how will we know which one is the right one? What values do we want to guide our decisions? When we say this is how we make decisions, and the agenda issue is sort of part of that. What do we want to pay attention to, and in what order? So as you'll see on the screen, those are the 6 items that we could potentially talk about. And it's up to you guys to decide. We can decide that on the listserv before the next meeting, which would be preferable so that I can get you guys a detailed agenda with links and everything. Or we can just, wing it the day of. I would prefer not to wing it. I would prefer be able to get a real detailed agenda out, because anymore it's not just to you guys on the board, but it's to everybody that's going to be participating. And the more information everybody has ahead of time, the better we can do. So I'm going to ask folks who are watching this video in anticipation of attending the board meeting, please tweet to the hashtag CTFuture. As you look at those agenda items, how would you prioritize them? What are the important things that you would want us to be paying attention to? And hopefully all together we can come up with 2, maybe 1, maybe 2 really good things to kick off the meeting on the 13th of May. I think that's all I've got. And so I'll see you guys. Oh, the one thing I did need to tell you guys is I have jury duty the week before the board meeting. So anything that we need to get done, if we can get it done before I go on jury duty, that would be terrific. I will see you guys on the 13th. Bye-bye.